Madam Speaker, I too wish to place on record my support for this motion. It is not support that I give with any great pleasure, but it is a duty of myself as a member of the House, and I would suggest of every right-thinking member of this House, and indeed every right-thinking citizen, would believe that the behavior set out in the motion put to the House a little earlier is what I would refer to as beyond the pale. That sort of language, that sort of utterance, that sort of conduct is not conduct which is acceptable in any sphere. As has been indicated by some of the previous speakers, that sort of language would not be tolerated in any school, any club, any association of any repute. Madam Speaker, however, in light of the fact that the members of the opposition have chosen to absent themselves yet again, it seems to me that it may be appropriate to address in some more detail than I might otherwise have done some of the aspects that have brought us to the position where this motion is being made. I say that because I know there are those who, albeit perhaps not many, who may feel, well, as was indicated, it's a political statement made on a political platform, and therefore it ought not to warrant the attention of this House. So, Madam Speaker, I think it's important that those who hear the words that are uttered in this House recognize that this House has a particular place in the structure of our society. This House, Madam Speaker, is not just a place where fancy titles are handed out and honourable is used left, right and centre, but has no bearing. Madam Speaker, honourable is a title which should be respected and highly regarded. It should be earned, and those who have it should respect it. And this House that we all refer to as the Honourable House, should be respected, particularly so by those who are members of this Honourable House. There are rules in this club, if you want to put it that way, and there are rules that all members of the club must adhere to. Also, Madam Speaker, it is a requirement for those who are members of the club to ensure that they demonstrate to the wider society that this Honourable House is indeed honourable and has that title for a reason. Madam Speaker, the role of the House and the decisions that are taken in the House, including the decision that is put before the House today, it is distinct and separate from any decision taken outside of this House by other authorities. I think it is possible to use the term that is used in respect to the British House of Parliament, where they refer to other places. And even in this House, we refer to strangers, those who are not members of the House. So, Madam Speaker, what happens in other places is for other places. But this House must regulate its own procedures and processes. And, Madam Speaker, the Constitution provides for that at Section 52 of the Constitution. For those who wish to read it for themselves, it's quite short, so I'll read this one. Under the marginal rubric, regulation of procedure in the House, subject to the provisions of this Constitution, the House may regulate its own procedure and may, in particular, make rules for the orderly conduct of its proceedings. Madam Speaker, that is the source of the power to make rules, and that makes clear that there is provision for rules in this House. Madam Speaker, freedom of speech, another term which is used liberally in our society. One hears it frequently on the streets, one hears it on the various talk shows. And people call in or people speak on the street and they say, "What's wrong with you? I can say whatever I want. I'm free. I have freedom of speech." Well, that's true. We live in a democratic society and all of us are free. Indeed, we are free to say whatever we want. That is true too. It is true to this extent. It is true that we can say whatever we want, but we must be prepared to pay the penalty for the words we say if they infringe upon the rules that society has set, or in the case of this House, if they infringe upon the rules that this House has set. It is noticeable, I think I've said it in this House before, but it is noticeable that most of our laws do not say "thou shalt not." Most of our laws say a person who does X commits an offense. A person who does Y commits an offense. You are therefore free, if you wish to do whatever it is that you are told constitutes an offense. But you will also note that where it says it says a person who does X commits an offense, and if convicted, the penalty is whatever. That is the situation that we have. We do not live in a totalitarian society which says you can't go here, you can't do there. But what it does say is, quite clearly, these are the rules, you abide by them, and all is fine. You can say whatever you want within the confines of those rules. You can do whatever you want within the confines of those rules. But if you choose, with the liberty that you have, to step outside of those rules, there is a price to pay. And in this circumstance, Madam Speaker, there is, I submit, a price to pay, and it is the price that has been that members of this House have been invited to subscribe to by way of the motion that has been moved by the Minister of Legal Affairs earlier this afternoon. Those who wish to look at their constitution in respect to the issue of freedom of speech can look at section 43, which will see, Madam Speaker, that freedom of speech is provided for those of us who are members of this House. We can say not exactly what we want, but we can say quite a lot. And indeed, we expressly are permitted to say certain things that we would not or may not be permitted to say outside the House. And in particular, the phrase, I'm not reading all of section 43, but the relevant bit, no civil or criminal proceedings may be instituted against any member of the House for words spoken before or written in a report to the House or a committee thereof, or by reason of any matter or thing brought by him therein by petition, bill, resolution, motion, or otherwise. So that is protection for the House. But, Madam Speaker, perhaps the more significant protection, and that is more frequently referred to, is at section 10 of the Constitution, which is the freedom of expression as it's referred to. And, Madam Speaker, what that says, in summary, is this: that a person shall not be hindered in the enjoyment of his freedom of expression. I leave out the rest, that is in subsection 1. But here is the important caveat. Subsection 2, nothing contained in or done under the authority of any law shall be held to be inconsistent with or in contravention of this section to the extent that the law in question makes provision, A, that is reasonably required in the interest of defense, public safety, public order, public morality, or public health. And indeed, Madam Speaker, there are a number of others. But I just highlight public order and public morality. Madam Speaker, it is clear from the Constitution that we are all free to say whatever we want within reasonable bounds. In this case, Madam Speaker, I have not heard anybody in the discourse that I have heard in respect to the utterances that we are concerned with bold enough, I'm sure there are a few of them, but I have not heard them, bold enough to say that those words are words which are acceptable in any way, shape, or form. That in and of itself, Madam Speaker, is most telling in a society like ours. Because in a society like ours, the tendency is for those who know that somebody they like, they support, is doing wrong, the tendency is to still find means and ways of supporting them, justifying or excusing them. Madam Speaker, even in this instance, there have been examples of that form of attempted justification and support. I will address the House briefly in a moment on that support, but I think it is important before I do that I highlight the fact and highlight it clearly that those of us who are fortunate enough, and I believe it is fortunate, that we have been given the opportunity to represent people, to represent the nation, different forms, different levels, different roles, but to represent and to appear in this House and to address the House to bring forward views on behalf of the people, to seek to better this nation. It is a privilege, and many of us do not perhaps recognize the privilege. And I think, Madam Speaker, that because we have that privilege, I think that the populace is entitled to expect a higher standard of behavior from us. And we, in turn, should be prepared to deliver that higher standard of behavior and conduct in our affairs. Madam Speaker, there has been a tendency over the past years to embark upon loose talk, and in my view, there has been an increasing degeneration in the behavior of people in the public space. I think most of us, if not all of us, would accept that the sort of things that are said in public, the sort of behavior that is exhibited in public today as compared to the years that we were growing up, even to perhaps 10, 15 years ago, is remarkably, remarkably different. Madam Speaker, as a nation, that sort of trend is one which we should seek to arrest, and arrest hastily. It is not a path, Madam Speaker, that I think that we want to continue to follow. It is a path which can only lead, Madam Speaker, to destruction. And I would take this opportunity to invite those who have made it their business over the recent years to constantly seek to incite behavior which most of us consider to be inappropriate and in some cases downright dangerous, to desist from that behavior. Other speakers have already alluded to the fact that there has been an increasing sound of fury, an increasing use of violent expressions. That is indeed correct, Madam Speaker, and it is something that is not tolerable. Perhaps, Madam Speaker, in fact, as I speak here, perhaps those who are charged with the responsibility of safeguarding and securing the security of this nation need to look more closely at what is going on. I speak in particular of the police and security forces. This type of thing is perhaps something that we have allowed to go unchecked for too long. And one of the dangers is that you chip away, you chip away, you chip away, and gradually, gradually, you lead to a position where the building will collapse. Maybe we have a tendency in Dominica to say, oh, he doesn't mean anything, or she doesn't mean anything, or let it pass, or we pretend that we have not noticed. Perhaps we need to start noticing, Madam Speaker. Perhaps the time has come for us as a people to start noticing and to start taking a stand and start making people realize that they need to be cognizant of the role that they have, of the function that they have, and of the consequences of the actions that they choose to take. So I turn now, Madam Speaker, to the justifications. Madam Speaker, I said that at the outset of my address that it gave me no pleasure. The reason I said that is that the motion is in relation to a member of this House. And from a humanitarian point of view, one would not wish to see discomfort in another human being. Notwithstanding the expression of that particular member, which has led to the discussion and to the debate that we're having now, I think I was brought up on a diet from my parents of two wrongs do not make a right. So, albeit the member has brought the motion upon himself, but I would have preferred that we were not at the place that we are. But, Madam Speaker, we are where we are. The member, as has been indicated by the Honourable Prime Minister a short while ago, had an opportunity to come to this House and at least seek to demonstrate genuine contrition, to come to the House and to invite the House to permit him to make a public apology to this House. As I said a short while ago, this House is its own particular entity, for want of a better phrase. This House has its own rules. It is the highest court in the land. It is the place that makes the laws. It is a place that the members have particular and special responsibilities. So, Madam Speaker, if the member had come to this House yesterday and had invited the House to permit him to apologize to this House, in the face of this House, it may have been an indication of genuine contrition. But that opportunity was not taken. It was allowed to pass. And indeed, Madam Speaker, the subsequent behavior of that member and his colleagues indicates that there never was an intention to demonstrate or articulate genuine contrition for what was appalling behavior, appalling language, outrageous and unacceptable conduct in any civilized society. Madam Speaker, those who seek to put forward justification for behavior which is not justifiable have, in this instance, sought to do so. I'm sure that those who are hearing my voice now will have heard attempts to equate the offending language that this motion is concerned with language used on other occasions by other individuals, and have sought to say, well, it was said by James or by Jim or by Jill, so what's the problem? Well, as I just said, two wrongs do not make a right, even if the two sets of utterances were indeed the same, which I have not yet heard any utterance of the scale of the utterance that we are concerned with. Madam Speaker, the reality is that if one looks at the apology, and the apology is set out in full in the motion, one will see the structure of that apology, or purported apology, and one will be forgiven for saying or considering that the purported apology was in fact an attempt to mislead, really, the public, and was not, as it claims to be, without reservation. Madam Speaker, why do I say that? There are a number of reasons, but among those are the following. The senator in that purported apology states, I made certain statements. I made certain statements. The statements, or the reference there, is not qualified. It doesn't say, I made certain unacceptable statements. It doesn't say, I made certain wholly unacceptable statements. It doesn't in any way indicate that those statements are statements that the good member genuinely considers to be inappropriate. Not only that, but following that, it goes on to say this, I made certain statements targeted at questionable behaviors. So you see, Madam Speaker, that the author of this purported apology is aware that it is possible to use language that demonstrates what one wishes to say, because he was quite capable of saying that there were behaviors, but he didn't just say certain behaviors, he said certain questionable behaviors. So he's articulating the nature of the behaviors as he perceived them. But, Madam Speaker, there's more. He goes on to say, which I consider to be harmful to the public interest. So let's read the whole of that. I made certain statements targeted at questionable behaviors which I consider to be harmful to the public interest. One can assume that what the author is saying is harmful to the public interest is the certain statements he made. But is that obvious? Might he not also be saying that it is the questionable behaviors that is harmful to the interests of the public? Could that not have been phrased in a way which removes all ambiguity? I suggest it could have. Was it an accident that it was phrased this way? I suggest it may have been, but I suggest it also may not have been. Those who hear me will make their own conclusion. But Madam Speaker, although it then goes on to say that the statements were unbecoming of me, one realizes that it would have been much simpler, I suggest, to have said something along the lines of this. I made certain unacceptable statements that were unbecoming of me, etc., etc. Not to seek to justify those statements by claiming that they were targeted at questionable behaviors. But not only is that, Madam Speaker, but to say that they were targeted at questionable behaviors is, I suggest, untrue. Those who heard the statement, and again I'm not going to read it, but it is in the motion, will be aware that the statement named a particular individual and referred to other individuals who the author of the statement put in the same category as the named individual. I suggest, Madam Speaker, that the statement was aimed at those people and others, not at questionable behaviors, but at people. And indeed, Madam Speaker, I suggest that this statement, when looked at, is an attack on the Electoral Commission, a constitutional body which ought to be given the highest regard by all of us, and certainly to be given that regard in absence of any good and proper reason to do otherwise. And Madam Speaker, I submit that there is no good and proper reason to do otherwise. As has been said in other places, and I repeat, the Electoral Commission is a commission which has on it members, 2 members I believe, were appointed on the recommendation of the opposition. Is that not correct? No. 2 members appointed on the recommendation of the government, and I think a chairman appointed by the president. So the opposition has the same authority. There is parity on the commission in terms of membership and representation. So as the opposition persists in doing, to mislead the public, to suggest that the Electoral Commission is somehow on an escapade of its own, seeking to inhibit unduly, unfairly, improperly the opposition in its quest for power, is entirely incorrect, mischievous, and dangerous to the fabric of this society. It is that kind of misrepresentation that doubtless led the member to utter the wholly unacceptable language that he did on the occasion in question. Madam Speaker, I have set out, or sought to set out, and to identify, draw attention to the relevant law and rules of this House under which we have operated, so that those who are not here, particularly in light of the fact that those who should have remained and should have addressed this House and the nation in respect of the utterances, either to explain them away or to apologize for them, but have left. Madam Speaker, I think it is my duty to ensure that those who hear our voice today understand exactly the basis upon which we are operating. So with your leave, Madam Speaker, I will just briefly indicate the rules. Madam Speaker, Rule 44, Standing Order 44.8, provides for the conduct of members of this House which occurs elsewhere or wherever to be raised in a debate. So, for those who may say that the conduct was not in the House, we are entitled, I submit, under Standing Order 44.8 to debate that conduct before this House. But what it provides is that the conduct of members of the House shall not be raised except upon a substantive motion moved for that purpose. So therefore, ordinarily, the conduct of a member of the House is not to be raised in debate, but there is an exception, and that exception requires a substantive motion to be moved. And those who have been listening will be aware that the Minister moved a substantive motion by way of Standing Order 32, which provides for the normal requirement for notice to be given, to be dispensed with. And the Honourable Minister, when he sought to put the motion, sought and obtained the consent of the Honourable Speaker of the House and the assent of the members of the House present, the majority of them, so as to bring him within the terms of Standing Order 32. So, Madam Speaker, that being said, the reality is that the utterances that this motion concerns, I repeat, are utterances that this House ought not to tolerate, cannot tolerate, and, Madam Speaker, quite properly is seeking to address by way of a motion. And, Madam Speaker, I have no difficulty whatsoever in supporting the motion before the House.